Hey guys, it's Yuta. So, if you want to know how to learn Japanese, you've come to the right place because I will show you 3 simple steps to learn Japanese. So, we're gonna start with step 1, the alphabet and pronunciation. We have 3 types of scripts in Japanese: hiragana, katakana, and kanji, and line stickers. We can say hiragana and katakana are Japanese alphabets because kanji literally means hand letters, as in hand Chinese. Now, you could technically write Japanese using the Latin alphabet, which we call Romaji. But we don't use it for daily communication, and honestly, it's such a hassle for us to read it. So, unless you want to talk to Japanese people purely in line stickers, which by the way is entirely possible, you need to learn hiragana and katakana. They're pretty straightforward because most of the time, because there's always exceptions, one letter represents one sound. So it goes a, I, U, E, O, and that's it. Easy peasy Japanesey. You can actually write Japanese entirely in kana because they cover all the sounds. This means you can also learn pronunciation as you learn kana. It will really pay off to pay attention to the pronunciation in the beginning because it's gonna be very hard to change your accent once you get used to it. Just imagine how hard it's going to be if you have to completely change your accent in English. But you probably don't want to spend 3 months just to perfect your Japanese accent. So I recommend focusing on sounds that matter. For example, some American English speakers have trouble telling the difference between a and o. In English, books and box are the same word. They're just different accents. But in Japanese, a and o are completely different. Kawaii means cute. Kawaii means scary. I've heard a story when somebody tried to say kawaii, cute, to a girl, but ended up saying kawaii, scary. Such a nice compliment. So you don't want to mix up these words. These words are different not just in terms of vowels, but also length and pitch patterns. Kawaii has 4 molars and low, high, high, low pitch pattern. Kawaii has 3 molars and low, high, low pitch pattern. They are pretty different. So spending time to learn these differences would make a lot of difference. On the other hand, Japanese is not very strict about the R sound. Rarirurero. The Japanese R is softer than the English L or the Spanish R, and it's very different from the English R. However, they all kind of sound the same to many Japanese people. I'm pretty sure most Japanese people have trouble telling the difference between la, and ra. Many Japanese people can't tell the difference between light and right. So the chances are, even if your R is a little softer or a little harder than the proper Japanese R, they can't even tell the difference. So if you have a limited amount of time, which everybody does, it makes more sense to focus on things that are semantically different, such as R and O. Of course, if you really care about your R and want to perfect it, there's nothing wrong with it. So that's pronunciation, and you might be wondering, what about kanji? You can learn little by little. There's many ways of learning kanji that work for different people, so maybe I will discuss these on different occasions. Now we can move on to step 2, basic grammar and vocabulary. This is what most people think of when they think about learning Japanese. Some people go to language schools. Some people use textbooks and apps. And some people use learning Japanese as an excuse to watch a lot of anime. What resources you use doesn't matter as much as actually using these resources and learn. But if you want to learn Japanese with me, I will teach you the kind of Japanese that real-life Japanese people today actually speak, which can be different from the kind of Japanese that textbooks and apps teach you because they can be unnatural and outdated. So click the link in the description and subscribe. Fortunately, basic Japanese grammar can be quite simple. For example, we have this word, 難しい, which means difficult. If you're learning Japanese and you think it's difficult, you can say 難しい. But what if you think it's not that difficult? Well, 難しい is a type of word called I adjective. And with this type of adjective, you can replace I with kunai to make a negative form. So 難しい becomes 難しくない. Now you know what to say if you think Japanese is not difficult. 難しくない. Pretty easy, right? Or should I say 難しくない? Now, compare that to basic English grammar. Do you know how many irregular verbs English has? It has about 200. What's the past tense of the word work? Well, it's a regular verb, so it's worked. What's the past tense of write? Is it write it? No, it's wrote. And what's the past tense of hit? Is it hit it? No, it's still hit. Why, English people? Why? Yeah, we had to memorize these irregular verbs in school. But do you know how many irregular verbs we have in Japanese? Do we have 100? Do we have 200? No, we only have 2. Of course, Japanese has its own quirks, but overall, basic grammar is fairly regular. So you just have to remember a bunch of these patterns. And you can move on to step 3, getting a lot of input. After doing step 2, you can speak some basic Japanese. You can go to a restaurant and order food. You can talk about what you did yesterday. And you can definitely make Japanese people say, 日本語上手ですね. But you probably struggle with making sentences fast and think, is it 食べられた or is it 食べさせられた? Your Japanese is still not good enough to discuss complex philosophical topics like why your waifu is better than other people's waifu, or to articulate your nuanced thoughts on how you are superior to all those weebs because you're not into anime. So, what do you have to do? Many people think that if they continue doing step 2, studying textbooks and taking classes, they're gonna be fluent. But that's not how it works. Instead, you need to get a lot of input. You can use anything for this. You can watch Netflix, YouTube videos, you can listen to the radio, you can read manga, books, or you can even watch anime, just like how I watch anime for research purposes. Just be sure you're not reading English subtitles. You need to understand Japanese directly without translation. But Japanese captions are great because they can actually improve your listening skills. Netflix has TV shows and anime with Japanese captions, so you should definitely give it a try. The most important thing here is whatever resource you use, you need to understand enough to enjoy them. You don't have to understand everything, but you need to understand enough. This is called comprehensible input. Let me demonstrate this. I'm gonna read this. Listen to this. 実の父親の前でそんな会話をすることが本当に平気の平座なのか? いや、違った。こいつは僕に嫌がらせをするためなら自分が傷を負うことをためらわない性格なのだった。If you don't speak a lot of Japanese, how much Japanese you just learned from this? Probably not much. And if I continue reading, how much Japanese do you think you will learn? Probably not much either. Now let me try something else. リンゴ食べる? リンゴ apple. 食べる to eat. So I'm asking you if you want to eat this apple. 卵食べる? Now, even if you don't know the word 卵, you could probably guess. Even if you didn't understand 100%, you could guess some words. So if you keep listening to something you can understand a little bit, you will learn new things. And that's why it's important to use resources that you understand just enough. And that's also why you won't become magically fluent just by moving to Japan, unless you already know enough Japanese to understand conversations between Japanese people. And that's the reason why we did step 2. Did you know adults can learn languages faster than kids? It's because they can use their first language to understand a lot of concepts pretty fast. How long do you think it takes for kids to understand a phrase like 曖昧で抽象的な議論, an ambiguous, abstract argument? It's not going to be easy for little kids to understand these words. But you can understand this instantly if I explain 曖昧 means ambiguous, 抽象的 means abstract, 議論 means argument. So basic grammar and vocabulary is kind of a shortcut to learn a language. They're not enough to be proficient, but they accelerate your learning. And the next question is, how much input do you need? It really depends on your goals, but a good number seems to be about 1,000 hours for average English speakers. Do you think 1,000 hours is a lot? Well, when I started learning English seriously, I also came across this number, and it did seem a lot. At that time, I didn't speak enough English to understand books and TV shows, so spending 1,000 hours consuming English sounded like a chore. But when I actually went ahead and started getting a lot of input, I realized that it wasn't nearly as hard as I thought. Sure, it was hard in the beginning, but once I started to understand books and TV shows to just enjoy them, consuming them for hours became really easy. So don't be discouraged if you feel it's a little hard in the beginning. Just try finding something you can understand even if it's a little bit and keep doing. You're gonna get there. So now you've spent 1,000 hours getting comprehensible input and you feel comfortable communicating in Japanese. If you think your Japanese is good enough for what you want to do and move on, that can be a practical choice. But if you are tempted to go online and start criticizing other people's Japanese, not so fast. At this level, even though you can communicate with Japanese people, you're making a lot of mistakes without realizing. It's very easy to be overconfident once you get to this level, and I'm certainly not unfamiliar with this situation. There was a time when I was thinking my English was amazing, but looking back, it really wasn't. Confidence is great, but self-awareness is also important. So, it's time for you to unlock the hidden step. Brushing up your Japanese. This is where you have to pay attention to the nuances that you might have been missing. And this step can be quite rewarding because these nuances are some of the most interesting parts of the Japanese language. For example, そうだよ、そうだね、そうだぜ、そうだわ、そうだわ、そうだよね、そうだぞ、そうだろ、そうだ、そうね、そう。All of them, they all mean something like that's right, but they have different nuances. A lot of people who speak Japanese reasonably well use these particles incorrectly and sound a little strange, which, by the way, is fine on a practical level because we can understand them most of the time from the context. But if you want to be really good at speaking Japanese, these are some of the things that you can work on. So, these are the steps of learning Japanese. And honestly, knowing how to learn Japanese is not the difficult part. The difficult part is actually doing it. So if you want to learn Japanese with me, I will teach you the kind of Japanese that real-life Japanese people today actually speak, which can be different from the kind of Japanese that textbooks and apps teach you because they can be unnatural and outdated. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta. Alright, see you guys soon. Ciao, ciao!